What if everything you know as food vanished tomorrow? Would you eat moss if it meant staying alive? In the year 1315, a brutal winter struck. The wind howled through wooden homes. The earth froze. The granaries were empty. By 7 o'clock in the morning, hunger had already claimed its first child. You step outside, it's not just cold, it's soul-shattering. Below your feet, frozen mud. In your hands, a damp handful of moss. There is no store, no firewood, no bread, no one coming, just you, the earth, and the will to survive. The sky is gray, the snow tastes like dust, and the only thing between your family and death is what you can dig from beneath the frost. In this world, they boiled bark, they ate leather, they chewed moss soaked in hot stones. It wasn't survival, it was endurance. It was ancestral knowledge, or extinction. This is not fiction. This is medieval survival. And today you'll discover the ancient secrets that kept villages alive when all hope was buried beneath the snow. It was the winter of 1315, but not just any winter, a curse that silenced entire villages. The sun hadn't pierced the clouds in weeks. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the snow had already buried the doorways. And by nightfall, by 22 hours, nothing but the howling of wind and growling stomachs could be heard in the hills of medieval England. There was no bread, no broth. The last grains of barley had been boiled into watery soup days. Ergo, children no longer cried. They trembled, quiet, staring at empty bowls. Mothers no longer soothed. They scraped the base of frozen stones, hoping for lichen. Fathers dug with frostbitten hands, searching for roots that might fool the body for a night. And the elders, they simply closed their eyes. The houses, once filled with the scent of rye bread and smoked meat, now reeked of wet leather, ash, and rot. The air itself stung. At barely 30 degrees Fahrenheit, even the breath of life froze before it left the lips. Every step outside was a negotiation with death. The fields, empty. The forests, silent. Even the rats had vanished. Inside one home, a boy presses his ear to his mother's chest, not for warmth, but to hear if her heart still beats. That was the reality of medieval survival. A brutal winter, a collapsing world, and no one coming to save you. And still, they endured. They lit fires with wet straw, boiled moss, dried bark, and called it a meal. Why? Because they knew something we forgot. They held on to ancestral techniques. They trusted wisdom passed down in whispered stories. And they believed, even as their bellies twisted, that survival begins not in the stomach but in the soul. Their bodies were broken, but their spirit unyielding. And now, you, watching this, must ask yourself, if you were born into that frozen village, what would you feel first? Hunger, fear, rage? Tell us in the comments. What would your first instinct be? Hide, cry, or fight for fire? The wind doesn't stop. Not at 5 in the morning. Not at 22 hours of the night. It slips through every crack in the wooden walls. It bites through cloth. And in the belly the ache returns. Deeper than hunger now. It becomes fear. Quiet. Cold. Fear. A medieval peasant opens the wooden door, its hinges frozen stiff. Outside the land is white, not from beauty but from absence. Nothing moves, not the birds, not the rabbits, not even the rats. The snow is silent, but beneath the surface, life clings. That's where they looked. Beneath the bark, along the stones near rivers, under trees that bent low with age. They weren't foraging for berries, those had vanished weeks ago. They searched for moss, the right moss. And not all moss was safe. That was the first law of medieval survival. Some moss caused vomiting. Others triggered fever or madness. A mistake meant 3 days of agony or death. But those who learned the secrets, passed down through calloused hands and tired eyes, could tell by color, texture, the way it held moisture. They would kneel by the tree trunks, scrape gently with bone or stone, collect the green pulp, boil it twice, sometimes 3 times in clay pots lined with hot stones, then eat it while it was still warm, before the cold stole the heat from the bowl. It tasted of earth, bitter and rough, but it filled the space where emptiness lived. It was not delicious, it was not nourishing, but it was alive, and sometimes that was enough. It was a technique forged through desperation, honed by repetition, and in the brutal winters of the Middle Ages, it was worth more than any weapon, because while swords protected against men, moss protected against death itself. And that's the silent truth most forget. Survival wasn't about strength. It was about remembering what nature offered and knowing what not to trust. A single mistake could end a bloodline, but one handful of moss prepared with wisdom could keep a child breathing one more night. This was not skill. It was sacred knowledge, a piece of the forgotten world, a whisper of the ancestors, echoing in the woods, saying, "Not all green things kill. Some save. Learn the difference, or vanish." Now imagine this. It's your child crying beside you. Snow falls harder, the soup is gone, and the only thing between them and the void is a patch of moss you can barely recognize. Would you know which to pick, or would you risk everything based on a guess? Beneath the snow, beneath the frostbitten silence, the earth still held secrets. The surface had died weeks ago. Fields turned to stone, streams frozen into glass. But the medieval peasants, knew where to look. They had no thermometers, no seed banks, only memory and instinct shaped by generations. This was ancestral knowledge, passed not through books, but through dirt under fingernails and hunger in the bones. At the edge of the woods, in the cracks where trees met the frozen soil, they searched for roots, not by sight, not in green or bloom, but by feel. The base of an invisible dandelion, the thick arm of a burdock root, the pale skin of wild parsnip, roots hidden beneath the snow like whispers from another world. These were the vegetables of survival, not the kind you plate with herbs or drizzle in oil. These were pulled from icy graves, scraped clean with frozen fingertips, and blessed with desperation. They cooked them with ash, not seasoning, necessity. Sometimes they'd bury the roots beneath embers and let them soften overnight. Sometimes they'd grind them down and mix with moss or bark, forming a dense, fibrous paste. They called it nothing, because naming it felt like pretending it was food. They ate in silence, eyes closed, not to savor, to forget, because the truth is, in a winter like that, eating wasn't a joy. It was an act of defiance, of spiritual resistance. Every bite said, "I'm still here." One mother used to tell her children, "Close your eyes. Taste the summer it used to be." The children nodded, chewed, cried anyway, and they survived. This was the soul of medieval survival, not heroism, not glory, but the ability to find nourishment where none should exist, to turn roots into resistance, to craft meals not from abundance, but from memory and dirt. They knew every spot where the soil stayed warm longer, every patch that held just enough life to save another breath. These were not farmers, they were readers of the land. The earth was a sacred book, and the roots beneath it were lines written in hunger. There was no victory, only continuation. And for the medieval peasants, that was enough. If these ancient techniques stir something inside you, if a part of you feels the call of this wisdom lost beneath centuries of comfort, support our mission. Share it. Let it live again. Leave your like. Subscribe. Because someday this knowledge may not be history. It may be your only hope. And now I ask you, could you feed your family with what lies beneath the snow? Or would you walk past salvation and never know it was there? Today dinner is an app away. At 7:30 in the evening you scroll, you tap, and within 30 minutes sushi, pizza or soup arrives, warm, fragrant, untouched by struggle. But not long ago, in the heart of a winter brutal enough to erase entire villages, that same comfort would have sounded like a fable, something only kings could dream of. We toss leftovers without blinking. They scraped bark and gave thanks. You crave convenience. They craved one more day alive. We live surrounded by abundance, and yet forget what real hunger feels like. A medieval peasant, a peasant of the 14th century, had no such miracles. When hunger came, it didn't knock. It tore through the door, silent and savage, and they walked through snow, waist deep. 5 kilometers, sometimes more, not for a feast, but for a patch of moss, a stubborn root, a plant so bitter it made the tongue ache. Imagine that walk. It's not 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It's barely 20. Your breath turns to crystals. Your fingers stiffen. Your feet bleed through cracked leather, and still you walk. Because someone in your home believes you'll return with something. Anything. That was survival in the Middle Ages. Not grand battles or noble speeches, but footsteps in the snow, desperation dressed as routine, and a kind of faith in nature that most of us can't even imagine today. Now we panic when the power goes out for 1 hour. We freeze when the Wi-Fi drops. We complain when our meals take too long to arrive, but they cooked bark, ate boiled linen, scraped fat from old bones and called it broth. They didn't have gas, or refrigerators, or backup generators. They had only the land, and what little of it hadn't yet frozen to death. They didn't survive with technology. They survived despite its absence. That is resistance without comfort. That is the wisdom of the forgotten. That is what we now call ancestral techniques, because they worked when nothing else did. So let's be honest. Would you survive without your stove, your fridge, your daily deliveries and digital lifelines, or would you be the first to fall? Because the snow outside is no longer filtered through a screen, but pressing against your window. And this time, no one's coming. Tell me truly, would your instincts awaken, or would the silence swallow you? In the heart of winter, real. Winter, not the mild chill of a broken heater, but the deep, merciless cold of a world without mercy. Some secrets were whispered, never written, passed between cupped hands and hollow eyes. They were not lessons, they were survival spells. And among these forgotten techniques of medieval survival, there was one spoken only in low voices near dying fires. It was a secret, not sacred, but feared. The recipe was known in only a few frozen villages that clung to life at the edge of nothing. It began with earth. Yes, earth. Soil darkened by decay, carefully filtered, dried near the hearth and softened again, not with water, but with old lard, old animal fat, rendered from scraps, bones and marrow long expired. The result was a brown paste, thick, odorous, grim. They didn't name it, they didn't celebrate it, they just used it. Some said it began as a recipe for war, a wartime mixture for when even moss was gone and bark had lost its bite. Others believed it came from the plagues, when death outnumbered meals and the line between food and fuel blurred. Children didn't ask what it was. They were told, "It will help you sleep." Men didn't question it. They spread it on stale bark and chewed slowly. And the women, those who remembered the exact proportions, guarded the knowledge as both burden and blessing. Because here's the thing, get it right, and it sustained you. 1 spoon could quiet the stomach until morning. 2 could warm the body through the night, but get it wrong. Too much earth, not enough fat. Spoiled fat, dirty earth. The body would turn on itself. Sickness, fever, sometimes silence, permanent and cold. This was not a meal. It was a decision. To risk everything, or starve. And still, some chose the paste, because the scream of hunger at 3 in the morning is louder than fear. Because a mother would rather gamble with poison than bury another child. Because desperation, in its final form, no longer looks like panic. It looks like patience, like ritual, like a shaking hand stirring earth and lard beneath a weak flame. This is the side of the Middle Ages no bard sang about, no scroll recorded, because it wasn't glorious, it wasn't noble, it was raw survival, masked in shame and silence. But maybe the shame isn't theirs. Maybe it's ours, for forgetting what people had to do just to last another sunrise. So tell me, if your family was starving, the fire was dying, and all you had left was soil and old fat, would you do it? Or would pride cost you more than death ever could? Close your eyes for just a second. Now picture this. Your hands are trembling, raw from the cold. You're holding a lump of damp moss, not on a plate, not with seasoning, just torn from a rock, boiled twice over a fire that barely stayed alive through the night. You lift it to your mouth, not because you want to, but because you must. Your lips are cracked. Your teeth ache from the cold. Every fiber in your body protests, but your family is watching. Your child's ribs are showing. And you are the only one who found something, even if that something grew in the cracks between death and dirt. This is not food, not as we understand it, but in that moment, it becomes sacred. The wind moans through the wooden slats of your hut. The sky outside is grey, unmoving. It's 8 degrees Fahrenheit, the fire is out, and there's nothing left to burn but memory. Still you chew, not for the taste. There is none. Not for the comfort. There is none. But for time. For one more night. One more breath in a world that has forgotten mercy. There's no shame in that moment. Only choice. And the courage to make it. The kind of courage we rarely speak of in history books, but one that built the very bones of the world we live in now. Because sometimes what keeps us alive is not what we desire, but what the earth still offers if we're humble enough to take it. And now silently I ask you, if the world fell silent tonight, and all you had left was what you could pull from frozen ground, would you dare eat it, or would your pride let you starve beneath the snow? Because somewhere in that silence, someone still remembered how to make warmth from almost nothing. Inside a crumbling hut, at nearly 20 and 2 o'clock at night, the fire is dying. There's no wood left, no fat to burn, just embers, huddled together like refugees in the ashes. The cold outside is creeping back in, not all at once, but through the cracks, through the floor, through the silence. A medieval peasant kneels by what remains of the hearth. He doesn't pray, he thinks, and he remembers. There was a technique, almost forgotten now, passed down from grandmothers who survived the worst winters of the 14th century. You don't need a full fire to make heat. You only need a stone and patience. He finds one, smooth, dark, the size of his palm, places it gently on the last breath of flame, waits, watches. The glow returns to the rock, a warmth hidden beneath its skin. He takes a clay bowl, chipped at the rim but still strong, packs it with moss and water, then drops the hot stone inside, and there it is. A hiss, a cloud of steam. The room briefly smells like forest and smoke. The moss softens, the water warms, and in a world frozen solid, he creates a kind of miracle, a soup without fire. It won't fill the belly, but it will fool it. It won't bring back summer, but it will hold off death. One more day, one more breath, one more chance to try again tomorrow. This wasn't magic. It was forgotten wisdom, born not of luxury but of relentless necessity, the kind of trick no school teaches, but every ancestor knew. It wasn't just about food, it was about defiance, about not surrendering when everything says you should, because, even without flame, they found a way to make warmth. Even without hope, they made soup, and somehow, in that moment, that was enough. If these ancestral memories stir something in your soul, if part of you wonders what we've lost while chasing comfort, then join us. Be part of this legacy. Subscribe to the channel. Keep this wisdom alive, because someday when the power is gone, the silence deepens, and all that's left is cold stone and old instinct. Will you know how to turn it into heat, or will you wait for help and freeze before it comes? The blizzard arrived like a sentence passed in silence. No warning, no grace, just the wind rising like a scream across the valley. By the 3rd day, the sky had vanished. By the 6th, the sound of birds was just a memory. By the 14th, even the sun had stopped trying. It was not night, it was not day, just grey, endless and unmoved. In these frozen villages scattered like forgotten thoughts on the map, everything stopped. The water froze first. Wells became tombs of glass. Then the rats disappeared. No scurrying, no scraps, only stillness. Inside one home, a mother boiled strips of old leather. The shoe that once protected her son's feet now bubbled in weak broth, skin, dirt, salt, scraped from the floor. She called it soup. He called it hope. In another hut, a grandfather with frozen fingers scraped lichen from the northern face of a stone. He whispered to it, not for comfort, but to feel less alone, to remember he was still human. A child, no older than 5, knelt near a doorway cracked open to the cold. She scooped a clump of snow and soil, pressed it to her lips, chewed slowly, eyes wide, no tears left. This was not just hunger, this was the bottom of the well, the kind of suffering that makes stories stop. And yet it wasn't the end, because what lay ahead was darker still. Not just the absence of food, but the collapse of belief. The firewood was gone. The candles had melted into wax puddles they dared not eat. The old songs no longer felt real, and those who still prayed began doing so in silence. This is what famine looks like in the heart of a medieval winter. Not drama, not noise, but slow, heavy quiet. A world suspended in frost, where everything living learns to wait, and the question begins to turn, not toward what we will eat, but who. Because in the silence that follows the last meal, something breaks, and not everything that breaks can be put back. So I ask you, quietly, as the snow thickens at your door and the fire whispers its final breath, what would you do if the next thing you had to eat was someone you loved? When the last root had been eaten, when bark had been boiled until it dissolved into bitter broth, and even the moss had run out, there was still something left. It wasn't food in the way we understand it. It couldn't be chewed or stored, but it kept people alive. It was imagination, it was memory. It was the invisible stockpile, the emotional reserve. In frozen villages where temperatures dropped below 12 degrees Fahrenheit, when the fire had turned to ash and the walls no longer held the wind, the medieval peasants would gather near the dim glow of coals. They sat shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in wool and silence, and then someone would speak, not with instructions, not with fear, but with a story. They remembered harvests from 10 winters ago, meals with fresh bread and stew thick with meat and herbs. They told tales of festivals, of laughter echoing down village roads, of the smell of roasted onions and spiced wine. The children, listening with wide eyes and hollow stomachs, smiled. They could taste the memories, and that changed everything. The mind, when starving, becomes desperate. But if filled with warmth, even if only imagined, it can trick the body into holding on. It buys time. It defies despair. They sang old songs, not to pass time, but to survive time. The act of remembering became the act of resisting. In that brutal winter, where food had long disappeared, the spirit remained. It clung to melody, to memory, to meaning. This wasn't just psychological, it was ancestral wisdom, an ancient understanding that the body may need calories, but it depends just as much on hope, on purpose, on love recalled and laughter relived. We don't talk about this kind of survival anymore. It doesn't fit in emergency kits, it can't be bottled or sold, but it might be the most powerful technique of all, because when everything else is gone, when the cold is louder than your thoughts, sometimes the only thing that keeps the heart beating is a memory strong enough to warm the soul. So I'll ask you, if tomorrow your world went dark, no electricity, no food, no comfort, would you know how to feed your spirit? Or has modern life left you full in the body, but starved in the soul? What if tomorrow everything stopped? No warning, no announcement, just silence. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from absence. No hum of machines, no buzz from a screen, just wind, trees, and your own heartbeat, now far too loud. It's 20 in 1 hour. Your house feels colder than it should. You check the heater. Nothing. The lights flicker once, then go. You look outside. No movement, no lights from the neighbors, no signal on your phone. No response when you speak. And that's when it hits you. This might be the beginning, not of a storm, but of a return to something ancient, something no one taught you how to face. Would you know what to do? Could you keep your family warm without gas? Could you keep them fed without stores? Could you find the right root beneath snow or boil moss to make broth? You were never taught how to survive like a medieval peasant. No one showed you how they faced winter without technology, how they built heat from stone, meals from bark, courage from story. But they did, and they didn't wait for help. They became it. The forests you pass every day, would they become allies or threats? The wind outside your window, would it be a whisper or a warning? Tonight it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit in your home, safe and lit, but what if it wasn't? Would your instincts awaken? Would you rise, or would you freeze? This is not fear, this is a question, one that echoes across centuries, and only you can answer it. So now, quietly, honestly, if this night were your last with light, would you remember what matters? or would you wait for rescue answer from a world that's already gone? They didn't have plastic, they didn't have convenience, they didn't have a second chance. The medieval peasants survived with what the land gave. No more, no less. They pulled roots from frozen ground with bare hands. They boiled moss not to flavor, but to delay death. They whispered ancient knowledge beside dying fires, because sometimes the only thing stronger than hunger is memory. There was no app, no power grid, no one to save them but themselves, and still somehow they lived, not through comfort, but through connection. They knew what we've forgotten, that survival is not about abundance, it's about adaptation, it's about listening to the land when it speaks in silence, it's about honoring the bones of the earth with every step, and finding sustenance in what others would call dirt. That winter, they ate bark, they chewed leather, they drank snow mixed with ash, and yes, they ate mud, not because they wanted to, but because they understood a truth that echoes across centuries. Life isn't about what we want, it's about what we're willing to endure to keep going. This was medieval survival, real, raw, ruthless, and yet within all that suffering there was something sacred, something human, something eternal, because to endure the winter with nothing but your hands and your will, to wake up at 22 o'clock at night with your children crying from hunger and still go out into the dark to search for moss, to bring home anything, even if it's not food, that is not weakness, that is a legacy. And when the snow finally melted, when the sun returned in the month no one thought they'd see again, the ones who survived weren't the strongest. They were the most connected, to the earth, to each other, to something deeper inside. So if eating mud was the price, then it was the price of not disappearing, of saying, in the face of everything, I am still here, and now, after all this, you must ask yourself, if the earth took back the world tonight, would you know how to live with it again? Or would you vanish, not from hunger, but from forgetting who you are? If your heart beat stronger during this story, if something ancient stirred inside you, then you are not just a spectator. You are one of us, a guardian of forgotten wisdom, a voice in the silence, a soul that remembers. Join our brotherhood of survivors, this circle of those who refuse to let the past be buried. Subscribe now and carry this torch with us. And before you go, tell us in the comments, which ancestral technique would you trust first? When the winter finally comes, your words may awaken someone else's instincts. Your insight may become another soul's salvation. Leave a like not for us but for them, for those who once endured with nothing but will, and for those yet to face the cold and share this video. Because in the right hands, an old story is not just memory. It's survival, it's fire, it's future. Now, your journey doesn't end here. The next video on your screen holds another fragment of the wisdom you were never taught, but were born to remember. Click it, and walk one step further down the path of ancestral resilience. The road is long, but you're not walking it alone.